Welcome to episode 3 of the Going Pro series. This is a series in which I'm doing a deep dive on making the transition from homebrewer to the commercial side. The initial video was just an introduction to the series. Then we went into jobs, positions, and terminology at a craft brewery. And now we're going to go into the what it's like. What is it actually like to work at a craft brewery on a daily basis? What you need to be prepared for physically? What do you need to be prepared for mentally? What are some similarities as far as skills that carry over from the homebrewing side to the commercial side, and what are some things that are very different on the commercial side that you definitely need to be paying attention to as you make that transition. So we'll just jump right into it. For those of you who haven't watched the previous episode, it'll be linked up here somewhere. I mentioned briefly how the position at the brewery that I work at is I'm the main cellarman. But if you're interested in what that means as far as a position standpoint, you can go watch that other video and I go into more detail. It's really a dance as far as trying to coordinate with tank availability for the brewer and the new beers coming in, and then making sure that the beers are finishing when they need to be finished in order for the guys in packaging to be able to package the specific amounts that they need of the specific runs in order to fulfill orders and that kind of a thing. So anyway, that's my job, which is kind of a cool middleman position almost, where you're dealing with both sides, major sides of the production process. You're dealing with working closely with the brewer, and you're working closely with the guys on the canning line and filling kegs. From a daily tasks perspective, I can speak to detail from the cellarman perspective, obviously, because that's what I do. But there's definitely going to be a lot of carryover on both sides of the equation. It's really just different equipment and some different responsibilities as far as packaging and as far as brewing is concerned. But some of the physical demands and mental demands and whatnot are pretty similar. And so just take that for what it is. From a physical standpoint, I came from agriculture, which is an extremely physical job, and not only that, but you're also in the elements every day. That's something that I don't have to deal with anymore. I'm inside, obviously, in the cellar, but from a physical standpoint, it's also a very physical job. That's something that I don't think a lot of people think about when you're moving from the homebrewing side to the commercial side. Is you're standing on concrete for 8-9 hours a day. You're moving really heavy hoses and fittings and stuff like that are full of liquid. It can be 30, 40, 50 pounds. We're going up and down ladders with 22 to 40 something pound bags of hops. You're having to crawl around on the top of tanks. You're dealing with like hot liquids and a lot of harsh chemicals and that kind of a thing. But from a physical standpoint, I think you really need to be prepared for that. If somebody's not prepared for the physical demands, which are pretty significant, I think that's going to be a huge shocker to you right off the bat. So and obviously this depends on the size of the brewery and what kind of equipment you're dealing with. We're dealing with pretty large equipment for the most part, although we have fermenters all the way from 120 barrels down to 10 barrel, we have 1 7-barrel fermenter even. So I deal with all sizes, everything in between, but as a result, the cellar's pretty big, so we deal with lots of long lengths of hoses, which adds a lot of weight and things need to be moved around and whatnot. And so anyway, but I guess at the end of the day, a big thing to consider is the fact that regardless of which side you're going to be on, brewing is a physical job. And obviously automation is going to, depending on what kind of a brewery it is, automation will decrease your workload potentially, but you just need to be prepared to get physical. That's for sure. From the mental side, I think something to really consider is the fact that what you're doing a lot of the time is essentially being a maintenance / janitor. So you're constantly upkeeping equipment, you're constantly cleaning equipment and sanitizing equipment, and only a small portion of what you're actually doing has something directly related to dealing with the product itself, the beer. those, dry hopping, and obviously you're taking gravity measurements and doing some quality control, tasting almost every single day. And that's cool because it has to do with the beer itself. But all of that other time is spent cleaning tanks and replacing pieces of tanks and sanitizing tanks and emptying tanks and making sure that all that stuff is running properly. And it's the same thing on the brew house side. You're brewing beer a good chunk of the time, but almost equal, if not more time, you're spending cleaning all the equipment and prepping all the equipment in order to brew another beer. Just consider that. When you think about, on the homebrew side, the amount of time that you spend cleaning and sanitizing stuff, just imagine that, like multiplying that time out to fill an entire day, and you end up cleaning and sanitizing a lot. So just, you got to be prepared for that. One of the big takeaways that realizations I should say that I had pretty early on is that your skills as a home brewer, where you're, building your system and you're troubleshooting and tweaking things and trying to get the system to work properly and make little improvements and try to make better and better beer and try to finesse your process more and more and more to make it more efficient. That whole mindset and problem solving sort of DIY situation, that does not go away by any stretch of the imagination on the brewing side. You would think going into it that everything would be super dialed and everything would be working properly all the time, and it's just not the case at all, especially when you're dealing with equipment that's old. There's a special trick to get everything to work. There's a special way of turning this or turning that, or move this just this way, and this tank you clean this way, and this tank you adjust this a little bit to clean it that way. So just, and you personally are constantly improving your process to try to make use of your time most efficiently, and constantly troubleshooting and trying to figure out ways of avoiding problems after they get resolved for the future. But that whole DIY problem solving, making it work kind of mindset is super critical on the commercial side as well. So don't discount that as a home brewer. That's something that you come in with a huge advantage over somebody maybe who just wants to start working at a brewery and they've never really brewed beer at home before. That's a big selling point, I think, as a really committed home brewer that you can bring to the table when you're looking for an employment opportunity at a craft establishment. When you first arrive, it's going to be a fire hose of information. There's so much stuff that is going to get thrown at you. So many terms and equipment names and process steps that you're not necessarily familiar with when it comes to brewing beer, because it's such a large scale. You're dealing with a lot of pumps, and the amount of valves and understanding which valves and which hoses are connecting to what. All of that is stuff that will be really confusing at first, and you're just going to feel completely overwhelmed with information and process steps and trying to keep it all straight in your head. But if you stick with it for a few weeks, it'll start to settle. You'll start to digest it, and all of a sudden you'll find yourself under control and you feel like you've got a handle on everything. But that break-in phase can be pretty overwhelming. So that was the advice that one of our head brewer kept giving me, was just stick with it. Just stick with it. It'll all make sense. It'll all make sense eventually. And so, and he was 100% right. You got to take a step back with everything you're doing and think about the big picture, because from a big picture perspective, it's identical to the stuff that you're doing at home. It's just you're using different equipment and you're using valves and you're using hoses and all that kind of stuff. But the process of producing the beer goes into a fermenter. It ferments for a period of time. You cold crash it. You then move it potentially into a bright tank to carbonate it, which is essentially like your giant keg. You move it into your bright tank to carbonate it, and then it gets transferred and off to canning. So if you can just keep in your head, okay, that's the process, and then what do we do when we're done with brewing beer? Well, we've got to clean and then sanitize. So then it's like, okay, we're just doing that process. It's called CIP and SIP, which is like clean in place and sanitize in place, I think. Just continue to think about big picture things, because that's going to help you get through all the minutia that is necessary to remember and master to be effective at your position. When you first go into the cellar, right, you have no idea what things are problematic, what noises are problematic, what what things you're seeing, like leaking or making or doing something, like you're not sure what's a problem and what's normal. And so just keep paying attention and asking questions, and eventually you start to develop a sense where when you hear something or you see something or you smell something that's out of the ordinary, you can automatically diagnose that as a potential problem and then go and see what the heck is going on. So that's something that's super similar with the farming background to me, is like you develop this eye of being able to see problems as they're arising or just as they're about to happen, and being able to sort of head them off at the pass and not let them snowball or balloon into something that is going to require all day to fix. So it's always better to ask a question about, is that supposed to be happening? Is that sound supposed to be a thing? Is that alarm normal? Is that supposed to look like that? Is that smell supposed to be like that? Asking those questions are super important for you, and it really makes sure that you are understanding and developing that eye for your job, essentially. So that's another really important piece, I think. And you definitely have to be somebody who's organized and detail oriented, because there's a lot being thrown at you. You're trying to coordinate with the guys on the brewing side, you're trying to coordinate with the guys on the packaging side, you're trying to maintain a semblance of order in your cellar. And so you definitely need to have some steps and protocols to keep all your ducks in a row, so to speak. We use a brewery software that records what's happening in all the tanks, but I also have a big whiteboard that I have everything written out, like all the tanks. It's a big diagram basically of all the tanks and all the bright tanks and everything, and they're all labeled, and that's like the most up-to-date version of what's going on, just in case something goes screwy, which happens all the time with our software. You get a bug, or something doesn't input properly, or somebody put something in improperly, or deleted something accidentally, or whatever, because there's a lot of people who are accessing the information in the online. So having that board of being able to be fully in control of the board, and like, this is in real time what's going on, and yeah, I'm the only one who can see this, but it's like my record for what is happening in reality. And then if there's any problems that arise online, you're able to address that because you have a record all in one place. So just, I guess what to take away from that is just to make sure that you've got your protocols that work for you in place. And if you're replacing somebody else, like you're hired and somebody else has had a bunch of protocols in place that work for them, once you get your feet under you, don't feel bad about adjusting things and tweaking them to try to get them to work for you, because it's just going to make things more efficient for yourself. And as long as people are on board with that, which they should be, the whole thing's going to run a lot smoother if you're comfortable. I think that covers almost everything that I can think about. Maybe just to recap really quickly, it's a physical job. You got to be prepared for that. You have to be prepared for the majority of your job being cleaning and maintenance, the minority of it actually dealing with the real beer itself. You need to be really detail oriented and organized, because you have a lot thrown at you. When you first get there, it's going to be a fire hose of information, but just think about the big picture, and eventually all of it's going to settle. Work on developing your eye for problems before they arise, and make sure you have your processes and protocols in place that help you stay on top of everything. So if you can sort of keep those general thoughts in mind as you're trying to make the transition, I think it's gonna serve you well. And obviously every situation is different, every brewery is different, every sort of demand is gonna be different depending on what place you find yourself at. It's something that's definitely from a cellarman's perspective, but I think it can be carried over on pretty much all sides of production and be useful. So with that, I think we're going to wrap this video up. If you have any questions or concerns, or if you worked in the industry and have some things to add, let's get a discussion going in the comments. I'd love to hear from all of you, and I'll see you guys on the next episode, where we're going to finally get down to how to go about getting a job, what to do, what to look for, where to look. Should I be talking to the bartender at the tasting room? Should I be looking elsewhere? Just sort of some strategies and thoughts when it comes to getting down to applying and trying to find jobs. Thanks for watching, and Prost.